Welcome to the peaceful space of sleep-friendly science, where the gentle lapping of waves against a sunken ship can reveal a treasure more valuable than gold. A window into a lost mind. Tonight, our journey takes us deep beneath the sea, to a discovery that challenged everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. It is a story of a mysterious object, a corroded lump of bronze that held the secrets of the cosmos. Now settle in, take a deep breath, and let the soft sounds guide you as we begin tonight's journey into the unknown. Section 1. The Sponge Diver's Treasure. Our story does not begin in the hushed halls of a museum, nor in the dusty quiet of a scholar's library. It begins with the wind and the sea, in a conversation as old as time itself. Let your mind drift back to the turn of the 20th century, to the year 1900. Picture the Aegean Sea, not as a placid blue postcard, but as a living, breathing entity, its surface a shimmering tapestry of silver and sapphire, its depths a vault of forgotten stories. For centuries, this sea has been the great highway of the ancient world, a cradle of myths, of heroes, and of commerce. And like any great highway, it has witnessed its share of accidents, its share of tragedies, leaving behind sleeping secrets in the silent darkness of the seabed. It is here, on these luminous waters, that we meet our first characters. They are not archaeologists or historians. They are a hardy crew of Greek sponge divers from the island of Symi. Imagine their vessel, a small wooden boat called a simiaco, powered by sail and by the strength of their arms. It is a vessel that is alive with the smells of salt, tar, and the faint earthy scent of the sea sponges they seek. Their captain is a man named Demetrius Contis, a man whose face is a map of the sun and the sea, whose hands know the language of ropes and nets better than any book. Their work is a strange and dangerous art, a journey into another world. Picture one of the divers, a man named Elias Stadiatus, preparing to descend. He is sealed into a heavy copper helmet, with the single glass window to the world. He wears a thick, clumsy canvas suit. This is the scaphandro, the standard diving dress of the era. Air is not supplied by a modern tank on his back, but is pumped down to him by hand, by his brothers on the deck, a rhythmic, life-giving pulse through a long, trailing hose. To descend is an act of profound trust, a surrender to the depths and to the men above. Each dive is a slow, dreamlike fall into a world of muffled silence, of shifting blue light, a world where he becomes a slow, lumbering ghost on the seafloor, searching for the strange, animal-like sponges that are his livelihood. In the spring of that year, the divers are returning from a season of work off the coast of North Africa, their boat heavy with their precious, porous cargo. As they sail through the Aegean, the sea, their provider, turns against them. A storm of legendary violence descends, a furious tempest that turns the sky a bruised purple and churns the sea into a chaos of white-capped waves. Their small boat is no match for this power. Captain Contis does the only thing he can. He seeks shelter. He steers his vessel towards the nearest scrap of land, a rugged, inhospitable island that serves as a rocky punctuation mark between the Peloponnese and Crete. Its name is Antikythera. For several days they wait, anchored in the lee of the island, listening to the storm howl around them. When the fury finally subsides, the sea is calm once more, but their supplies are low. The captain decides to send a diver down, not out of hope for a great find, but simply because they are there. It is a chance to test the waters, to perhaps find a few sponges to make up for the lost time. Elias Stadiatus, the same diver we imagined before, prepares himself once more for the descent. He splashes into the cool, clear water. The world of the wind and the sky disappears, replaced by the deep blue silence. He sinks slowly, 150 feet down, the sunlight from the surface turning from white to gold, to green, and finally to a deep ethereal blue. He lands softly on the sandy bottom, his lead-soled boots kicking up a gentle cloud of sediment. And as the cloud clears, he sees something that makes his heart stop. It is not a sponge. It is not a rock. It is a hand. A human hand, made of bronze, reaching up from the seabed as if in supplication. He takes a hesitant step forward, his breath loud in the confines of his helmet, and then he sees more. A whole procession of what look like rotting corpses, scattered across the sea floor. There are bodies, heads, the ghostly figures of men and horses, all lying in a silent, dead assembly. Terrified, believing he has stumbled upon a scene of some recent, horrific shipwreck, Stadiatus signals frantically to be pulled up. He breaks the surface, sputtering, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and wonder. He babbles to his captain about the heap of dead naked women he has seen on the bottom of the sea. Captain Contis is a practical man. He is skeptical. He thinks the young diver has been overcome by nitrogen narcosis, the rapture of the deep, that can fill a diver's mind with hallucinations. To calm the man, and to satisfy his own curiosity, the captain decides to dive himself. He seals his own helmet, and descends into the blue silence. When he returns to the surface, his expression is one of profound, life-altering awe. The corpses, he reports, are not flesh. They are bronze and marble statues. They have not stumbled upon a modern tragedy. They have stumbled upon a lost world. They have found an ancient Roman shipwreck, a treasure ship that sank here, off this lonely island 2,000 years ago. Its magnificent cargo of art and luxury goods scattered across the seafloor like a king's forgotten jewels. They do not yet know the scale of their discovery, but they know their lives have changed forever. They have found a treasure beyond their wildest dreams. But the true treasure of Antikythera, the object that would rewrite the history of technology, was still down there waiting. It was not a beautiful statue or a golden crown. It was a corroded, unassuming lump of bronze that at first glance looked like nothing more than a rock. Section 2. A lump of corroded bronze. The discovery of a sunken treasure ship is only the first chapter of a story. The second, far more dangerous and difficult chapter, is the recovery. Captain Contis, a man of integrity, did not try to plunder the site for himself. He knew this discovery was not just his. It belonged to his country, to Greece, to history. He sailed to Athens and reported his find directly to the authorities. The Greek government, recognizing the immense historical significance of the find, acted swiftly. They organized the world's first major underwater archaeological excavation, and they hired the only men in the world capable of doing the job, Captain Contis and his crew of Semiote sponge divers. So, in the winter of 1900 and through the summer of 1901, these brave men returned to the storm-swept waters off Antikythera. This was no longer a gentle search for sponges. This was a brutal and perilous salvage operation. The conditions were horrific. The wreck lay at a depth of nearly 50 meters, or 160 feet, at the very edge of what was possible with the technology of the time. Every dive was a battle against the crushing pressure, the biting cold, and the ever-present danger of decompression sickness, or the bends, a crippling and often fatal condition that was still poorly understood. Imagine the scene on the deck of the support ship provided by the Greek Navy. The hand-cranked air pump, a constant rhythmic squeaking, the lifeline of the men below. The divers, one by one, descending into the deep blue. Their precious time on the bottom measured in minutes. They were working in a debris field, a chaotic underwater landscape of broken timbers, pottery shards, and the ghostly shapes of the ship's magnificent cargo. And what a cargo it was! Piece by piece, the treasures of the ancient world were brought up from the depths, emerging from the sea like ghosts returning to the world of the living. First came the great statues, the corpses that had so terrified Elias Stadiatus. The magnificent head of a Stoic philosopher, his bronze face thoughtful and serene, his eyes inlaid with stones that seemed to hold a deep ancient wisdom. The famous Antikythera youth, the life-sized bronze statue of a young man, perhaps the hero Perseus or the god Hermes, his arm outstretched as if offering a prize. There were marble statues of gods and heroes, their white forms ghostly and beautiful, draped in 2 millennia of sea growth. There were delicate glass bowls of impossible color and fragility, ornate pottery, gold jewelry, and thousands of bronze and silver coins that would later help to date the wreck to around 65 BC. It was a collection of masterpieces, a snapshot of the luxury and artistry of the late Hellenistic world, likely on its way from the coast of Asia Minor to a wealthy Roman patron's villa in Italy. The divers worked tirelessly, driven by a sense of national pride and the thrill of discovery. But the sea extracted a heavy price for its treasures. One diver died from the bins. 2 others were left permanently paralyzed. The excavation was a story of heroism and tragedy. And amidst all this splendor, this procession of gods and heroes, another object was brought to the surface. It did not come up with a triumphant cry. It was not recognized as a treasure. It was a single calcified lump, about the size of a large book or a modern laptop. It was greenish-brown, a shapeless mass of corroded bronze and calcified sea life. It looked for all the world like a rock. It was brought aboard the ship, perhaps with a shrug, and unceremoniously dumped in a pile with other, less remarkable-looking finds. It was fragmented in at least 3 main pieces, and no one gave it a second thought. It was just another piece of the wreckage, another lump of junk from the seabed. After nearly a year of work, the dangerous operation was called off. The recovered treasures were taken to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, where they caused a sensation. The world marveled at the beauty of the statues, at the incredible preservation of these 2,000-year-old works of art. The story of the Antikythera wreck became the story of the Antikythera treasures. And the lump of corroded bronze? It sat in a storage room at the museum, alongside other fragments. It was forgotten. The beautiful statues were cleaned and put on display in the grand halls, bathed in light. The lump sat in the dark on a wooden shelf gathering dust. It was an orphan of the wreck, an ugly duckling amidst a flock of majestic swans. No one knew that this unassuming rocky lump held a secret far more profound than any of the beautiful statues. The statues told a story about what the ancient Greeks made, about their ideas of beauty and divinity. The lump of bronze held a story about how they thought. It contained a universe of knowledge, a clockwork cosmos, all sealed within a tomb of corrosion, waiting patiently for a different kind of eye to see not a rock but a machine. The greatest treasure of Antikythera had been found, but its discovery was not yet complete. Section 3: The Ghost in the Gears. For 2 years the unassuming lump of bronze sat in storage at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, silent and ignored. The world's attention was fixed on the magnificent bronzes, the serene marble gods, the tangible and easily understood treasures of the wreck. The lump was just a footnote, a piece of debris. But inside its corroded shell, a secret was beginning to stir. The slow, patient work of chemistry was about to reveal the first hint of the wonder it held within. It happened on a spring day in May of 1902. The archaeologist Valerios Stais, a diligent and careful curator, was examining the finds from the Antikythera shipwreck. He picked up the lump. It was heavy, dense, and still looked more like a geological specimen than a human artifact. But as he turned it over in his hands, something happened. The object, which had been stable for 2,000 years on the seafloor, was now reacting to the moisture in the Athenian air. The millennia of slow corrosion had created internal stresses within the calcified mass. As he held it, it suddenly cracked. It split apart, falling into pieces in his hands, like a geode revealing its crystals. And in the fresh, clean break of the fractured surface, Stais saw something that defied all belief. It was not the amorphous structure of a rock. It was not the simple curve of a bronze pot. Embedded within the corroded matrix, perfectly preserved as if it were a fossil in stone, was a gear wheel. It was small, made of bronze, its teeth cut with a precision that was startling. And next to it, he could just make out inscriptions, faint Greek letters arranged in neat, careful lines. Imagine that moment of profound cognitive dissonance. It is 1902. The world runs on steam and steel, on massive, powerful gears that drive locomotives in factories. But the idea of complex precision gearing in the ancient world? It simply did not exist in the historical record. The history of technology as it was known was a simple linear story. The ancient Greeks had levers, they had pulleys, they had architectural genius. But intricate, miniature, clock-like mechanisms? That was a technology that belonged to the great cathedral clocks of late medieval Europe, more than 1,000 years after this shipwreck. To find a gear wheel in a lump of bronze from a Roman-era ship was like finding a microprocessor in a medieval Bible. It was an anachronism. It was impossible. Stays was stunned. He knew at once that this was no simple object. He published a brief paper announcing his discovery, calling it a kind of clock. He noted the presence of gear wheels and inscriptions, and suggested it might be a type of astronomical instrument. But his radical idea was met largely with silence or worse with dismissal. The scholarly world was simply not ready for it. Other experts examined the fragments and came to more comfortable, less world-shaking conclusions. Perhaps it was a part of a navigational instrument, a simple astrolabe. Or maybe the gears were part of some strange, unknown type of household gadget. The idea that it was a complex astronomical computer was just too fantastic to be believed. It violated the established narrative of the past. It was easier to assume it was simple than to rewrite the history of technology. And so, for another 50 years, the secret of the mechanism lay dormant once more. The object was now recognized as something interesting, but its true nature remained shrouded in skepticism. It was like a ghost trying to speak, but no one was willing to listen to its impossible story. Scholars would occasionally study the fragments, cataloging the visible gears, trying to decipher the faint inscriptions. They could see parts of the puzzle, but they could not yet imagine the whole. Think of the object now, sitting in its museum case. It is a puzzle box that has been partially opened, revealing a single baffling clue. A gear. A wheel designed to transmit motion, to turn at a precise rate, to mesh with another gear. It is the fundamental component of a machine designed to do something. The presence of that one small gear was a whisper from a lost world of technical thought. It suggested a level of mechanical sophistication, of abstract thinking made manifest in metal, that had been completely erased from our history. This was the ghost in the machine. A ghost that haunted the neat, clean story of technological progress. It whispered that the ancient world was not as simple as we had believed. It hinted that somewhere in the past, a great tradition of intricate mechanics had flourished, a tradition that had been lost, forgotten, and submerged, both literally under the waves of the Aegean, and figuratively under the waves of time. The gear was a promise that if someone could find a way to see inside the rest of the corroded lump, to see past the rocky exterior and into its mechanical heart, they would find something extraordinary. It would take another half-century, and the invention of a new kind of sight, to finally allow that ghost to tell its tale. Section 4. A Clockwork Cosmos. For half a century, the ghost remained in its prison of bronze. The gears that Valerio's Stays had seen were a tantalizing clue, a whisper from a forgotten world, but the full story remained locked away, sealed by corrosion. The world of scholarship moved on, and the Antikythera fragments remained a baffling, but minor curiosity. To unlock their secret would require a new kind of mind, and a new kind of sight. And in the middle of the 20th century both arrived. Our story now welcomes a new protagonist. Not a diver or a classicist, but a man who was uniquely suited to hear the ghost story. His name was Derek de Price. He was a British historian of science with the mind of a physicist. He was fascinated by the history of instruments, by the long, slow story of how humanity has built tools to understand the universe. He was a man who could look at a gear and see not just a piece of metal but an idea, a mathematical ratio made real. In 1951, Price came to Athens. He encountered the Antikythera fragments in the museum, and like the others before him, he was captivated. But unlike the others, he was not so quick to dismiss the possibility of its complexity. He saw the visible gears, the faint inscriptions. He saw the potential for something extraordinary. For years he was haunted by this object, by the mystery it held. He knew that to understand it he had to see inside it. He had to find a way to peer through the solid, corroded bronze and map the secrets hidden within. The technology to do this was now in its infancy. In collaboration with a Greek radiologist, Price arranged to have the fragments examined using a new and powerful tool: X-rays and gamma rays. This was a revolutionary step. For the first time, someone was attempting to look through the veil of time, to use the penetrating light of modern physics to illuminate the darkness of the ancient past. Imagine the scene in a hospital or a laboratory in Athens in the late 1950s. The corroded, lumpy fragments of the mechanism are carefully placed before the powerful eye of an X-ray machine. Photographic plates are set up behind them. The machine hums to life, flooding the ancient object with invisible radiation. The rays pass through the layers of corrosion, but they are stopped or at least slowed by the denser bronze of the gears hidden deep inside. They are drawing a shadow picture, a ghost image of the machine's inner workings. The first images were faint, blurry, difficult to interpret, but even in their ghostly ambiguity, they were a revelation. Price could see more gears. Not just the one or two that were visible on the broken surfaces, but a whole system. A complex, interlocking cascade of ghostly circles. He spent years studying these faint shadow pictures, patiently tracing the outlines of the wheels, meticulously counting the faint, spiky shadows of their teeth. It was an obsessive, painstaking process, like trying to reconstruct an entire symphony from a single muffled recording heard through a wall. As he worked, a picture began to emerge that was more radical and more astonishing than anyone had dared to imagine. He had identified more than 20 gear wheels, all arranged in a complex differential system. This was not a simple gadget. This was not just a clock to tell the time of day. This was a machine of profound sophistication. This is where Price made his great intellectual leap. He realized that the gear ratios, the number of teeth on each wheel, were not random. They were a kind of code. They corresponded to specific, known astronomical cycles. For example, the ancient Greeks knew that 19 solar years is almost exactly equal to 235 lunar months. This 19-year cycle, called the Metonic cycle, was the key to reconciling the solar calendar with the lunar calendar, to making the calendar stay in sync with the seasons year after year. And in the X-rays, Price found evidence of a gearing system that beautifully, elegantly modeled this very cycle. The pieces clicked into place. The front of the device, he proposed, had a large dial that showed the position of the sun and the moon in the zodiac throughout the year. As the user turned a knob on the side, the pointers for the sun and moon would move around the dial at different correct speeds, showing their positions in the sky. It was a mechanical model of the heavens, but it was the back of the device that revealed its true genius. There, he saw evidence of two large spiral dials. These, he realized, were the calendar displays. One spiral tracked the 19-year Metonic cycle, predicting the intricate dance of the solar and lunar calendars. The other, as we will see, tracks something even more profound. In 1959, Price published his findings in a groundbreaking article in Scientific American. He called the Antikythera mechanism an astronomical computer. The word computer was a deliberate and provocative choice. This was not a mere display. It was a device that took an input, the turning of a knob, representing the passage of time, and, through its intricate mechanical calculations, produced a complex set of outputs: the position of the sun, the phase of the moon, the state of the calendar. It was an analog computer, a machine that solved complex astronomical problems mechanically. The reaction from the academic world was once again one of deep and profound skepticism. It was just too much, too complex, too brilliant. His interpretation was seen as fanciful, an overreading of the blurry evidence. Most historians simply could not accept that the ancient Greeks, for all their philosophical and geometric genius, had possessed this level of intricate mechanical engineering. Such technology, they argued, did not reappear in the world for another 1400 years, with the great astronomical clocks of the European Renaissance. Price's computer seemed to break the laws of history. But Derek de Price was undeterred. He had seen the ghost in the gears. He had read the faint, shadowy language of the X-rays. He knew he was right. He had uncovered a lost branch of human history, a technological tradition so advanced that its rediscovery would change our very perception of the ancient mind. The lump of corroded bronze was no longer a rock. It was no longer a curiosity. It was a clockwork cosmos, a miniature universe of interlocking wheels, a testament to a level of genius that had been lost to the sea and almost lost forever to time. Section 5. The Language of the Stars. Derek de Price had given the ghost a voice, and it spoke the language of gears. He had proposed a breathtaking theory, that this corroded lump was a mechanical computer designed to model the heavens. But what exactly was it computing? What celestial story did its turning wheels tell? To understand the true genius of the Antikythera mechanism, you must first understand the cosmos as the ancient Greeks saw it. You must look up at the night sky not with the eyes of a modern astronomer, but with the mind of an ancient philosopher. To us, the sky is a place of almost infinite complexity, a chaotic spray of billions of galaxies. To the Greeks, the cosmos was a place of order, of elegance, of divine geometry. It was a cosmos, a well-ordered whole. They believed the earth was the stationary center of the universe, and that the heavens revolved around it in a series of perfect crystalline spheres. This was a universe you could understand, a system whose rules could be deciphered through observation and mathematics. The two most important celestial bodies in their world were the sun and the moon. They were the great timekeepers, the governors of life on earth. The sun's journey through the sky defined the day and the year. Its path against the background of the stars, a great circle we call the ecliptic, was divided into 12 equal parts, the 12 constellations of the zodiac. To know the sun's position in the zodiac was to know the season, the time for planting, the time for harvest. The front dial of the Antikythera mechanism, as Price had correctly deduced, was a beautiful zodiacal calendar. It had a pointer for the sun that, as a user turned the crank, would slowly move through the carved Greek names of the constellations. Creos the ram, Tavros the bull, Didymoi the twins. It was a perfect miniature sun, making its annual journey through a bronze sky. But the moon was a far more complex and troublesome character. While the sun's motion is steady and predictable, the moon is a celestial trickster. It waxes and wanes, its cycle of phases taking about 29.5 days. This lunar month was the basis for most ancient calendars. The problem is that the solar year, about 365.25 days, is not evenly divisible by the lunar month. 12 lunar months are about 11 days short of a full solar year. This lunar-solar discrepancy was a constant headache for ancient societies. If you followed a purely lunar calendar, your festivals would drift through the seasons. A harvest festival meant for autumn would, after a few years, end up taking place in the middle of summer. This is where the genius of the Metonic cycle comes in, the 19-year relationship we mentioned earlier. The Greeks had discovered that 19 solar years, which is 6,939.6 days, was almost precisely equal to 235 lunar months, 6,939.7 days. This magical 19-year cycle was the key to locking the sun and moon together. By adding 7 extra, intercalary months at specific points within this 19-year period, you could create a calendar that followed the moon's phases but never strayed far from the sun's seasons. This is precisely what one of the great spiral dials on the back of the mechanism did. It was a metonic calendar. The spiral track had 235 divisions, representing the 235 months of the 19-year cycle. A pointer would move along this track, showing the user exactly where they were in this grand celestial pattern. The inscriptions found on this dial, as later studies would confirm, specified which of the months were the special, intercalary ones. With this single elegant display, the mechanism solved the greatest calendrical problem of the ancient world. It was a sophisticated tool for organizing civic and religious life, for ensuring that the sacrifices to the gods were made at the correct time, in the correct season. But the moon had another trick up its sleeve. It not only governed the calendar, but it also held another, deeper cycle within its orbit. The Greeks knew that the moon did not move at a constant speed across the sky. Sometimes it seems to speed up and sometimes it slows down. We now know this is because the moon's orbit is not a perfect circle but an ellipse, and it moves faster when it is closer to the Earth. The ancient Greeks didn't know about elliptical orbits, but they were brilliant observers. They saw the effect. This first anomaly of the moon, was a deep puzzle. How could a divine celestial body, moving on a perfect sphere, change its speed? They had no physical explanation, but they could model it mathematically. And, astoundingly, the Antikythera mechanism could model it mechanically. And there was another cycle they knew. They noticed that eclipses, both solar and lunar, did not happen randomly. They occurred in a pattern. They discovered the Saros cycle, a period of about 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours, after which the Sun, Moon, and Earth returned to roughly the same relative geometry. A solar eclipse that happens today will be followed by a very similar eclipse 1 Saros cycle from now. To be able to predict an eclipse was a source of immense knowledge and immense power. Imagine being able to tell a king that in 3 months, the sun will go dark in the middle of the day. And the second great spiral dial on the back of the mechanism was nothing less than an eclipse predictor. Its spiraling track contained 223 divisions, for the 223 months in the Saros cycle. Inscriptions next to the months would indicate whether an eclipse was predicted, whether it would be solar or lunar, and even perhaps the time of day it would occur. This is the language the mechanism spoke. It was a language of cycles. The daily cycle of the sun, the monthly cycle of the moon, the yearly cycle of the seasons, the 19-year cycle of the calendar, and the 18-year cycle of the eclipses. It was a device that held all of astronomical time, from a single day to a generation, in its interlocking wheels. It was a microcosm, a miniature mechanical universe that mirrored the perfect, clockwork cosmos the Greeks saw when they looked up at the stars. It was a philosopher's guide to the heavens, a machine that made the mind of God understandable, tangible, and predictable. Section 6. The Imperfect Moon. To simply say that the Antikythera mechanism tracked the moon is to do a profound injustice to the beauty and subtlety of its design. The moon, as we have seen, was a celestial troublemaker. It was the source of the calendar's greatest puzzle, but it also presented a deeper, more philosophical problem. Its speed across the sky was not constant. It hurried and it lingered. This first anomaly of the moon was an affront to the Greek ideal of perfect, uniform, circular motion in the heavens. For a philosopher or an astronomer, this was not just a technical problem. It was a deep cosmic riddle. And the way the creator of the Antikythera mechanism chose to solve this riddle mechanically is arguably the most breathtaking single element in the entire device. It is a quiet, mechanical poem about the nature of imperfection. When Derek de Sala-Price first examined his X-ray images, he noticed a strange arrangement at the heart of the lunar gear train. There was a gear that was not fixed at its center like a normal wheel. It was mounted on another gear. It was an epicyclic gear system, a gear on a gear. This was already a sign of incredible sophistication. Epicyclic gears were part of the Greek mathematical models of the heavens, a way of using combinations of perfect circles to explain non-uniform motion. But seeing it rendered in bronze was another matter entirely. However, later, more detailed examinations by other researchers, most notably Michael Wright, a former curator at the Science Museum in London, revealed an even more subtle and ingenious device. As technology improved, Wright was able to take a new, more detailed set of X-rays. He was a master of mechanics, with a deep intuitive understanding of how machines work. As he studied his new, clearer images, he saw something Price had missed. The epicyclic gears were there, but there was something else. A tiny, almost invisible detail. One of the gears had a small pin sticking out of it. And this pin fit neatly into a slot cut into an adjacent gear. A pin and slot mechanism. To a casual observer, this might seem like a minor detail. To a mechanic, it is everything. This tiny, elegant feature is what elevates the mechanism from a brilliant calculator to a work of pure mechanical poetry. Let us try to picture how it works. Imagine two gears side by side. One gear is turned by the main drive of the machine at a steady, average speed, the moon's average journey through the sky. Now, on the face of this first gear, a small pin is fixed slightly off-center. The second gear has a straight slot cut across its face. As the first gear turns, the pin slides back and forth within the slot of the second gear, driving it. When the pin is at the part of its circular path that is closest to the center of the second gear, it moves the slot only a short distance for each degree of its own rotation. It is driving the second gear slowly. But as the pin travels around to the outermost part of its path, it is now further from the center of the second gear. Like a longer lever, it now pushes the slot a much greater distance for each degree of its rotation. It is driving the second gear quickly. The result is magical. A perfectly steady, uniform rotation of the first gear is transformed into a variable, cyclical speeding up and slowing down of the second gear. This simple, brilliant device takes the perfect motion of the driving wheel and uses it to create the imperfect, variable motion of the moon. It is a mechanical solution to a cosmological puzzle. It is the physical embodiment of the moon's first anomaly. This was a level of mechanical thinking that was thought to be completely absent from the ancient world. The first known appearance of a similar pin and slot device comes more than 1,000 years later, in the designs of the great Renaissance engineers. To find it here, in a corroded lump of bronze from 65 BC, was like finding a Shakespearean sonnet in a text from the Stone Age. It showed a mind or a tradition of minds that could think about the world not just in terms of pure mathematics, but in terms of applied, dynamic physical mechanics. This was not just a philosopher's model, it was an engineer's masterpiece. This single, subtle mechanism is a profound statement. It tells us that the creator of this device was not content with just showing the average position of the moon. They were obsessed with truth, with accuracy. They knew the moon was a trickster, and they were determined to model its tricks perfectly. They wanted their machine to be not just a good approximation of the cosmos, but a perfect miniature replica, with all its beautiful and frustrating irregularities. So when you picture the mechanism in operation, imagine this tiny hidden dance taking place at its heart. See the pin sliding back and forth in its slot, a silent rhythmic pulse. It is the mechanical heartbeat of the moon. With every turn, it gracefully translates the pure, idealized geometry of the Greek cosmos into the messy, observable reality of the night sky. It is a bridge between the world of perfect ideas and the world of imperfect observation. And it is perhaps the most eloquent and powerful testament to the sheer, unadulterated genius of the mind that conceived it. Section 7. Predicting the darkness. We have journeyed through the front of the mechanism, with its elegant zodiac dial showing the dance of the sun and the variable moon. We have explored one of the great spiral dials on the back, a masterwork of calendrical science that locked the solar and lunar years together for a generation. But now we must turn our attention to the second of the great rear dials. It is here that the mechanism moves beyond simply tracking time and celestial position. It is here that it becomes a tool of prophecy. This dial was designed to predict the most awesome, the most terrifying, and the most spiritually potent of all celestial events, the eclipse. For us today, an eclipse is a beautiful and well-understood astronomical event, a moment of wonder. For the ancient world, it was something far more. The sudden darkening of the sun in the middle of the day, or the slow, creeping bite of the Earth's shadow across the face of the full moon, these were not just celestial curiosities. They were omens. They were messages from the gods, potent portents of war, of famine, of the death of kings. An eclipse was a disruption of the cosmic order, a moment when the predictable, clockwork universe seemed to falter. To be able to predict such an event was to possess a truly formidable kind of power. It was to know the secrets of the gods, to understand the language of heavenly signs. The ancient astronomers, particularly the Babylonians, whose knowledge the Greeks inherited, had studied eclipses for centuries. They kept meticulous records, watching and noting when these celestial shadows would fall. And through this long, patient observation, they discovered a hidden rhythm. They found that similar eclipses tend to recur every 223 lunar months. This period, which we now call the Saros cycle, is the great key to eclipse prediction. And the second spiral dial on the back of the Antikythera mechanism was nothing less than a mechanical embodiment of this Saros cycle. Imagine this dial. It is a graceful spiral composed of 4 turns. The track of the spiral is marked with 223 divisions, one for each month in the cycle. A pointer driven by the complex gear train inside would creep along this track month by month, year by year. It was a countdown timer, a slow-motion clock ticking its way through the 18-year pattern of the eclipses. But it was more than just a countdown. The true genius of this display lay in the inscriptions, the tiny Greek letters engraved next to the months along the spiral track. These inscriptions constituted a kind of celestial code, a user's guide to the future. At certain months, the user would find a small cluster of symbols. Later research, using advanced imaging techniques, would decipher these faint markings. They were glyphs. A glyph that read sigma for Sigma Epsilon Lambda Eta Nu Eta, Selene the moon, indicated that a lunar eclipse was possible in that month. A glyph that read Eta for Eta Lambda Eta Omicron Sigma, Helios the sun, indicated a possible solar eclipse. The level of detail was stunning. The inscriptions did not just say an eclipse would happen. They provided more information. Some glyphs seemed to indicate the time of day or night the eclipse might be visible. But even more remarkably, they appeared to include information about the character of the eclipse. The color, for example. We know from Babylonian records that the color of a lunar eclipse, whether it was a deep, coppery red or a paler gray, was considered highly significant for its prophetic meaning. The mechanism's dial may well have encoded this information, providing the user with a complete, detailed forecast of the upcoming celestial omen. Why, you might ask, did the inscriptions only say an eclipse was possible? This is another sign of the device's profound astronomical sophistication. The creator knew that the Saros cycle is a powerful predictor, but it is not perfect. An eclipse that is predicted by the cycle might not be visible from a specific location on Earth. A lunar eclipse might happen during the day, when the moon is below the horizon. A solar eclipse path might track across a different part of the world. The mechanism wasn't a fortune teller making absolute pronouncements. It was a scientific instrument, giving the user all the available information, alerting them to the months when the celestial alignment was correct for an eclipse, leaving the final observation to the user themselves. The social and political power of this device is difficult to overstate. Imagine a Greek philosopher or priest in the court of a king. He brings forth this beautiful, intricate bronze box. He turns the handle, showing the king the movements of the heavens. And then he directs the king's attention to the Saros dial. "Your Majesty," he might say, "in 3 months' time the gods will send a sign. The moon will be devoured by a shadow in the middle of the night. But do not be alarmed. It is part of the great, divine order of things. I will tell you when it will begin, and when the moon will be reborn." In a world that lived in fear of these events, to be able to predict them with such calm, mechanical certainty was to possess a kind of divine authority. It was a tool not just for understanding the cosmos, but for demonstrating one's mastery over it. It was a machine that could turn chaos into order, fear into knowledge. And in the ancient world, knowledge, especially knowledge of the heavens, was the ultimate form of power. Section 8. A philosopher's machine. As the secrets of the mechanism were slowly coaxed from their corroded tomb, a new and tantalizing question began to form. We knew what the machine did, and we were beginning to understand how it did it. But the question of who loomed larger than ever. Who was the ghost in this machine? What singular genius or what forgotten tradition of genius could have conceived of and constructed such a masterpiece? To ask this question is to venture into the realm of historical detective work, to search for a mind that possessed the unique combination of skills required. A deep understanding of astronomy, a mastery of mathematics, and a brilliant, unprecedented talent for intricate mechanical engineering. The shipwreck itself gives us our first and most important clue. The style of the pottery and the dates on the coins found at the wreck site place the sinking of the ship firmly in the middle of the 1st century BC, somewhere around the year 65. This is the last time the machine could have been in use. But it was likely made earlier. The lettering of the inscriptions on the device itself seems to point to an earlier period, perhaps sometime between 150 and 100 BC. So we are looking for a creator or a school of thought that was flourishing in the 2nd century BC. Our search takes us to the heart of the Hellenistic world, to the great centers of Greek learning. And one island in particular emerges as the most likely candidate for the birthplace of this incredible device, the island of Rhodes. In the 2nd century BC, Rhodes was a bustling, cosmopolitan hub of commerce and culture. But more importantly, it was home to a preeminent school of astronomy and mathematics. It was here that the great astronomer Hipparchus did most of his life's work. Hipparchus is one of the giants of Greek science. He is often called the father of astronomy. He was a meticulous observer who compiled the first comprehensive star catalogue. He calculated the length of the year to within 6.5 minutes of the modern value. And crucially, he developed the mathematical theories of the sun and moon's motion, including the theory of epicycles to explain their variable speeds, the very theories that are physically embodied in the mechanism's gearwork. The astronomical knowledge encoded in the machine is perfectly consistent with the science of Hipparchus. He possessed the astronomical and mathematical genius. Did he also possess the mechanical skill? It is here that we find a fascinating link, a thread that connects Rhodes' astronomy and the lost art of mechanical model making. The great Roman statesman and philosopher Cicero, writing in the 1st century BC, just a few years after the Antikythera ship went down, tells a remarkable story. He writes of seeing 2 extraordinary machines, 2 mechanical spheres, that had been brought to Rome from Syracuse after the death of the legendary inventor Archimedes. Archimedes was, without doubt, the greatest mechanical genius of the ancient world. He died in 212 BC, a little too early to have built our mechanism, but Cicero tells us that he had constructed 2 bronze devices. One was a solid celestial globe, a map of the stars on a sphere. The other was something far more complex. Cicero describes a machine that, when a handle was turned, modeled the motions of the sun, the moon, and the 5 known planets. He says it showed the eclipses of the sun and moon, and that it perfectly reproduced the variable motions, the speeding up and slowing down, of these celestial bodies. The description is an almost perfect match for the capabilities of the Antikythera mechanism. It seems that Archimedes, a century before the Antikythera device was made, had already invented the tradition of the astronomical computer. He had created the first clockwork cosmos. This is the lost technological tradition that had been completely erased from the history books. Now, how does this connect to Rhodes? Cicero tells us that after Archimedes' death, his wondrous machine was kept in Rome. But he also tells us that a later philosopher, A Stoic named Posidonius, who taught on the island of Rhodes in the early 1st century BC, had also recently constructed a globe which, in its revolutions, shows the movements of the sun and stars and moon, just as they appear in the sky each day and night. It seems the tradition of Archimedes was alive and well on Rhodes. Posidonius himself was a brilliant polymath, an expert in astronomy, mathematics, and geography. He was a direct intellectual heir to the traditions of both Archimedes and Hipparchus. Here, the threads of our story converge. We have a place. Rhodes, the center of Hellenistic astronomy. We have the astronomical mastermind, Hipparchus, who developed the theories. We have the legendary mechanical founder, Archimedes, who invented the tradition. And we have the direct successor, Posidonius, who was building such machines at exactly the right time. The Antikythera mechanism was almost certainly not a one-of-a-kind invention. It was the product of a school, a tradition, a community of brilliant minds working at the intersection of philosophy, astronomy, and engineering. It was a philosopher's machine, built to demonstrate the beautiful divine order of a cosmos they believed could be understood through reason and mathematics. We may never know the name of the specific craftsman who bent the bronze and cut the teeth of the gears. He was likely a master artisan, working under the direction of a great philosopher-scientist like Posidonius. But we can now give the ghost in the machine a home and a lineage. It was born on the island of Rhodes, conceived in the mind of a philosopher, and descended from the genius of Archimedes himself. It is a physical manifestation of a golden age of Greek thought, a moment when the human mind reached out to grasp the very workings of the heavens, and for a brief, brilliant moment, succeeded in capturing them in bronze. Section 9. Reading the Lost Manual. For decades, the story of the Antikythera mechanism was a story told in shadows. It was pieced together from the faint, ghostly images of X-rays, interpreted by the brilliant but often doubted minds of scholars like Derek de Solla Price. The gears, the pointers, the dials, they told a story of what the machine did. But a deeper, more human layer of the story remained completely hidden, locked within the corroded surfaces of the fragments themselves. This was the story told not by gears but by words. The builders of this extraordinary device had left behind a user's manual, a detailed set of instructions and descriptions, inscribed directly onto the bronze faces of their creation. But for a century these words were almost entirely unreadable, their letters filled with corrosion, their message lost to time. The first hints of this text were seen by the very first observers. Valerio Stays had noted inscriptions. Price had struggled to decipher a few key terms, but the vast majority of the text remained a tantalizing, unreadable secret. To unlock it would require a technology even more powerful than the X-rays of the 1950s. It would require a new way of seeing, a way to make the invisible visible. In the early 2000s, an international multidisciplinary team, known as the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project, was formed. They brought together archaeologists, astronomers, historians of science, and, crucially, experts in the most advanced imaging technology on the planet. They were determined to finally read the lost manual. They would use two revolutionary techniques. The first was a custom-built 8-ton X-ray machine designed specifically for this one task. This was not a simple 2D X-ray machine like the one Price used. This was a computed tomography (CT) scanner. You may know this technology from the medical world, where it is used to create detailed 3D images of the inside of the human body. The team would use this same principle to create a complete, high-resolution, 3D digital model of the Antikythera fragments. They would be able to fly through the virtual object on a computer screen, to peel away the layers of corrosion, to isolate every single gear, and to see every hidden detail of its construction with a clarity that had previously been unimaginable. The second technique was a photographic one, called reflectance transformation imaging, RTI. Imagine trying to read an inscription on a worn, damaged stone. If you shine a light directly on it, the letters can be washed out. But if you move the light around, shining it from different low angles, the shadows cast by the faint indentations of the letters can suddenly make them leap into view. RTI is a computational version of this. A camera, mounted on a dome, takes dozens of photographs of the artifact's surface, each one lit from a different angle. A computer then combines these images, allowing a researcher to move a virtual light source across the screen, manipulating the shadows in real time to reveal surface details that are completely invisible to the naked eye. Armed with these two powerful new sets of eyes, the team went to work at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. They carefully placed the precious, fragile fragments inside the great CT scanner. They meticulously photographed every square millimeter of the surfaces with the RTI dome. And the results were a revelation beyond their most optimistic hopes. The ghosts that had been whispering for a century finally began to speak clearly. From the CT scans, they were able to map the entire gear train with absolute precision, confirming the genius of the pin-and-slot lunar anomaly system and discovering new subtle complexities in the design. But it was from the surfaces that the most human part of the story emerged. The RTI scans and the enhanced X-rays began to reveal text. Not just a few words here and there, but thousands of characters of elegant miniature Greek script, letters barely a millimeter high, arranged in neat, orderly lines. The entire front face of the mechanism, the front door of the device, was covered in text, describing the workings of the zodiacal display. The backplate was a dense tapestry of words, a detailed user's guide to the calendar and eclipse prediction spirals. They found labels for the constellations, descriptions of the signs of the zodiac, and detailed explanations of the various cycles. They could read the names of the months used in the calendar, which helped to pinpoint the origin of the mechanism even more precisely, likely to a colony of Corinth in northwestern Greece. One of the most poetic discoveries was the text associated with the eclipse dial. The inscriptions didn't just indicate an eclipse, they described what to expect. They used words that conveyed color and character, confirming the idea that the prophetic meaning of the eclipse was a key function. It was a manual for an ancient seer, a guide to interpreting the signs from the heavens. Even the empty spaces spoke. On the front dial there was a section that tracked the phases of the moon, likely with a small half-silvered ball that rotated to show the waxing and waning crescent. The text found here was not technical. It was descriptive. It read simply sunny, half-moon, full, shady. It was the simple, accessible language of a public display. In total, over 3,500 characters of text were recovered. The lost manual was being read again for the first time in 2 millennia. And the story it told was one of clarity, of a deep desire to explain and to educate. The creator of this device was not trying to hide their knowledge in arcane symbols. They were a brilliant teacher, laying out the secrets of their clockwork cosmos for all to see and understand. The inscriptions transformed the Antikythera mechanism from a silent, enigmatic machine into a talking book, a scientific instrument and its own instruction manual, all in one beautiful, intricate package. The ghost in the machine now had a voice, and it spoke the careful, rational, and deeply beautiful language of a Greek philosopher sharing their vision of the heavens. Section 10. A lost technological tradition. And so, through the patient work of a century, the ghost has been given form. The corroded lump of bronze has revealed itself to be a masterpiece of mechanical engineering, a portable philosopher's guide to the heavens. We have seen its gears, we have read its manual, we have understood its purpose. We have stood in awe of the minds that could conceive of and construct such a thing. And now, as our journey comes to its gentle end, we are left with one last haunting question. A question that is perhaps the deepest mystery of all. If the ancient Greeks could build this, what happened to all the others? Where did this incredible technology go? The Antikythera mechanism, as we have seen, was almost certainly not a singular, miraculous invention. The writings of Cicero about the spheres of Archimedes and Posidonius tell us that it was part of a tradition, a school of thought that had been developing for at least a century, if not longer. This was a mature technology. It was a tradition of genius that married the highest levels of astronomical theory with the most sophisticated and delicate mechanical craft. And yet, after the Antikythera ship went down around 65 BC, the tradition seems to vanish from the face of the Earth. There is no direct line of descent from the intricate, differential gearing of the Antikythera mechanism to the technology of the later Roman Empire. The Romans were brilliant engineers, masters of civil engineering, of aqueducts and architecture on a massive scale. But this tradition of fine miniature information processing mechanics seems to have withered and died. The historical record is almost completely silent. For the next 1400 years, there is nothing in the archaeological or textual record from Europe or the Western world that comes close to this level of complexity. It is as if the book of mechanical knowledge was slammed shut. Not until the great astronomical clocks began to be built in the cathedrals of 14th century Europe do we see a technology of similar ambition and sophistication. And even then, these European clocks were, in some ways, less complex than their ancient Greek predecessor. They were huge iron machines driven by weights, while the Antikythera mechanism was a compact, portable device made of bronze. The unbroken line of technological progress we have always imagined is revealed to be a fiction. There was a great peak of mechanical genius in the Hellenistic world, a peak that was then lost, forgotten, and not reached again for over a millennium. Why? How could such a powerful and beautiful tradition simply disappear? There is no single simple answer. We are left with a series of quiet, melancholy possibilities. Perhaps the knowledge was always confined to a very small elite group of philosopher-scientists and their dedicated craftsmen. It was never a widespread technology. It was a specialized art form, and when that small school of thought was disrupted by war, by economic collapse, by a simple lack of interested students, the fragile chain of knowledge was broken. The secrets were held by too few, and they were lost. Perhaps the social and cultural values of the world shifted. The Romans, who inherited the Greek world, had a different mindset. They were more practical, more interested in engineering for empire, for military conquest and public works, than in building intricate philosophical toys to model the heavens. The intellectual curiosity that drove the creation of the mechanism may simply have fallen out of fashion. The patrons who would fund such a device no longer existed. And then there is the simple tragic reality of time and decay. Bronze is a valuable material. It is easily melted down and repurposed. It is likely that many of these incredible machines did not survive because they were scrapped, their beautiful intricate gears melted down to make swords or coins or pots. The Antikythera mechanism only survived because it was lost to the sea, sealed in a watery tomb where it was safe from the recycling bins of history. It is a ghost because it is the sole survivor of a lost family, the last representative of a forgotten species of technology. Whatever the reason, the story of the Antikythera mechanism leaves us with a profound sense of wonder, but also a deep sense of humility. It reminds us that history is not a straight line. It is not a guaranteed upward march of progress. It is a fragile, contingent story. Knowledge can be lost. Genius can be forgotten. Entire traditions of thought can vanish into the depths, only to be rediscovered by chance, by a group of sponge divers taking shelter from a storm. The Antikythera mechanism is a message in a bottle, a whisper across 2,000 years of silence. It tells us that the ancient world was a richer, more complex, and more mechanically brilliant place than we ever knew. It challenges our sense of technological superiority, and it reminds us that we are always standing on the shoulders of forgotten giants. The ghost from the shipwreck has not just rewritten our history. It has changed our understanding of what is possible, and what is possible to lose. As we drift away from this story, back from the deep blue of the Aegean Sea, let the image of those turning gears settle in your mind. Let them be a gentle reminder of the hidden complexities that lie beneath the surface of things, of the lost stories that are always waiting to be found. The cosmos is a clockwork of immense and beautiful precision, and for a brief, shining moment, a group of ancient philosophers held a perfect model of it in their hands. Allow that sense of wonder, of connection to a lost and brilliant past, to guide you into a peaceful and deep sleep. Rest now and dream of the stars. Good night.